a shocking discovery. Today's Native Americans were not the first Americans. Okay, that's going to be a little radical. Instead, they left Central Asia and arrived in the Americas in the early AD era. So what people group did they come from? Well, who are their ancestors? And what is their story? Could they be linked to Europeans? Well, you're going to tune in to find out in this episode 15 with Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson from Answers in Genesis. I'm Ken Ham, CEO of Answers in Genesis, Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. And it's great to have Dr. Jeanson doing this particular research.
They're not who we think they are. They're Central Asians, emphasizing one of the points that I promised early on in this series. In episode 11, we looked at a revolution in pre-Columbian history. Even in mainstream archaeology, the long-standing stereotypes we've had about who the Native Americans were, whether they were primitive or not, all of these are being overturned even as we speak in mainstream science. And today we want to look at the ancient Native American connection to modern Europe. And to think about why Native Americans would leave Central Asia, let's deal with something more familiar. Let's think in today's terms why people might leave ancestral homelands. And there's many often sad examples we can think of in today's world. What comes to my mind is the refugee crisis. So could any of these explanations have applied historically to this question of today's Native Americans? Is there anything in history that might indicate and give us a clue as to why these people in the early AD era left their ancestral homelands in Asia and came across the Bering Strait? So let's turn our attention now to this region of history. And because so much of East Asian, Siberian, Central Asian history is unfamiliar, I want to give us some helpful handles by which to anchor our thinking by just moving the map a little bit further west to the other side of Eurasia, the combined continents of Europe and Asia, which I'll do frequently just because there's a lot of shared history and overlap between these two continents, and sometimes dividing them is a little bit arbitrary. Well, in the era of 250 to 800 AD, there's something very significant happening in Europe. Around the time of Christ, AD 1, AD 30, it was the Roman Empire that was ruling much of Europe. And around the 400s, 500s AD, after the Western and Eastern Roman Empires split up, the Western Roman Empire fell due to invasions from so-called Germanic barbarians. Some of these appear to be indigenous Europeans. We'll discuss them more when we talk about what happened to the Vikings in a future episode. But some of them were Central Asian, like the Huns, shown here by this green arrow. So on the other side of the map, the western side of the map, there was tremendous civil unrest, invasions, warfare happening in the Roman Empire. So that's what's happening on the left side. On the right side of the map, the Asian side of the map, you might recall from episode 9 when we discussed Chinese history, that we can summarize East Asian history, at least Chinese history, by a long series of Chinese dynasties that undergo periodic interruptions, usually due to invaders from the north. They're protected geographically in the west, the south, the east. It's the north where they build the Great Wall to try to keep these people out. Well, they can breach these defenses occasionally. And one of the major episodes, which at least one history book calls the Age of Division, happens exactly during this time period. The dynasty that precedes this, the end of it, is the Han Dynasty, around 200 to 20 AD. And there's all sorts of unrest then in China, division, so forth. There's barbarians who rule in northern China, and they don't get thrown out until the late 500s, early 600s AD by the Sui Dynasty. So it's the Han Dynasty that's ruling China around the time of Christ, sort of contemporary with the Roman Empire at times. They fall. Lots of division ensues. You have northern barbarian tribes like the Xianbei who are ruling up here and don't get thrown out till late 500s, 600s. And we discussed this when we talked about the ancient Chinese connection to modern Europe. It's this particular branch, this group on the tree that we call Group N, that shows this connection. Well, that's very intriguing. Around the same time that the Native Americans, today's Native Americans, are leaving Asia, you have tremendous upheaval and civil unrest in Asia. And in fact, because you have unrest all across the Asian continent, from Europe, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, this period of history has been given its own name, and the German name they came up with was the Völkerwanderung, or in English, the Great Wandering of Peoples, because there's so much activity in Central Asia, so much movement east and west. This is a massive transition period. So is it any surprise that we have not only movements within Asia, but from Asia out into an entirely different continent?
Tag your
So
favorite
what do you